right, so for the past few weeks, we've been doing a Galapagos binge, and that's because if you don't know, I'm going to the Galapagos this month. So I really want to watch the rest of these. So today we are watching Darwin's Finches. I'm pretty sure we will all know what this is about. I have learned about these things many times before, but I'm curious to see how they do this. But let's see, yes. Darwin's Finches by Film Associates of California, Los Angeles, publication date 1961. So I think this is different than the other programs we've watched on the Galapagos. That was all Harper Row. This is Film Associates of California. So it's going to be a little bit different, but I'm excited for that. That's actually why I chose this. So let's get into it. Darwin's Finches by the Film Associates of California, 1961. Here we go. Again, some nice, pleasant music. I always love the music. Darwin's Finches, Clues to the Origin of Species. Again, I think this was also shown in like a classroom for kids to watch or something. Shout out to Herbert Schick. Usually, all of the Galapagos videos we've watched so far, they all say this one phrase. They say laboratory for evolution. So I'm just calling it now. Let's see if they say it in this one as well. The nature sequences in this film were photographed in the Galapagos Islands by Dr. Robert I. Bowman, Department of Biology, San Francisco State College. Oh, okay, interesting. So we now know, I like this because I'm always wondering who took the photos or who took the film for this. And now we know exactly who did it, Robert Bowman. All right. Any shots that I have to celebrate them with Robert Bowman. It is funny that they included this whole thing afterwards. Like, I would imagine they were filmed in the Galapagos, It's an interesting thing to start on, a dinosaur. I forget what these were called, but I mean, I guess they're probably going to start us off by just talking about evolution in general, right? That's what this dinosaur is getting at, is evolution, right?
This is a paleontologist, a scientist who studies and reconstructs the life of the past.
Paleontologist. It's interesting that they're introducing us to paleontology of all things. This is a very unusual direction to start a program on Darwin's Finches about, but let's see. Dude, look at this old depiction of a dinosaur. We're not even talking about the Galapagos, but look at this old dinosaur. It's like an old lizard.
Paleontologists tell us that living things have changed greatly since life first appeared on Earth.
You can see the little Stegosaurus silhouette. You can barely see it though, so it's not worth it. Look at this dinosaur though, the one standing up. That's like, I don't even know what that would be, like a hadrosaur or something. It might be a theropod.
They tell us that many kinds of animals have disappeared.
It almost does look real, is the funny part. It's like these little tiny like fake small trees really does like a good job at making this look like full scale. But at the end of the day, this is just like a rubber T-Rex. I bet it looked really bad too. That's why they have this lighting. Like, this is not optimal lighting at all. I mean, I guess they're getting a really strong silhouette of this, but I think it probably just looked too plasticky, so they just played around with the lights or something.
But they also say that many new kinds...
Dude, I love this old depiction of the dinosaur, man. Like, yes, bring this back.
Or species.
Oh, man, we're getting a good animation, too, though. Oh, man, we're getting a tree of life. Here we go. I'm curious, like, if this is even accurate at all. It's not, like, inaccurate. This is, like, the saddest tree of life ever, though.
How do new kinds of living things come into being?
Even this shot of this bird, like, it's not centered at all, Like, you would think you would put the bird dead center, but it's, like, completely off. Where 90% of this shot is just blue. I don't think that shot was Robert Bowman, though.
Things come into being. How do new species...
What a weird little, just quick shot of a monkey before cutting back to this whole thing. Again, the editing and the animation is always so fascinating to me. The animation specifically, because every single camera movement, everything is a choice that somebody had to make to illustrate their point using what they had with them. So, they had this whole picture, but like what you zoom in on and what you do with the camera while you're speaking is also important to illustrate your point.
About 100 years ago, Charles Darwin...
Dang, they didn't even like explore that more than like, just here's a picture of a tree of life. That was also a rough animation of Darwin zooming in. I always forget that Darwin was younger than I am now when he visited the Galapagos. And just seeing this image of him, like he does look younger than me. I'm only 28 though. I'm not that old.
In the year
Like I think he was like 26.
a young English scientist tried to answer these questions. In the year 1832, Darwin was appointed chief naturalist aboard a research ship, the Beagle.
Dude, how can I get that job, right? Like what boats just had like a chief naturalist? Like obviously this must have been a special expedition, but like to just like get that job, like yeah, I'm a 26-year-old kid who has never like truly studied nature. Like I think he wanted to become a doctor, or his dad wanted him to become a doctor or something. So he had like an educational background in this sort of stuff, I guess, but like what a weird job. I don't know, it's just so bizarre to imagine like them hiring him, you know, like he like what did he even do? Like he had accomplished like nothing in the field of biology at this point, but he just got to tag along on this crazy boat ride. It just seems awesome. I'm so envious of people in this era that just got to go on wild, cool adventures, you know?
Which was to sail around the world.
Like me going to the Galapagos now is not the same as him going to the Galapagos back then.
One purpose of this voyage, to collect plants and animals in many different places.
Dude, they keep doing this like bad zoom in. I feel bad for the animators of all this because it really is like not eased at all. It just like hits you really hard.
On this trip, a tiny group of islands, 500 miles west.
Dude, I love this map though. The other maps that we've been seeing for the Galapagos have been good too, but this is like, because this is a painting of a map in a study, and we are so zoomed in on this part of the painting even.
Of the South American coast, proved most important for Darwin's observations.
Dude, and we're still zooming in. Like, this is
The
impressive.
Galapagos Islands.
Oh, wow. Okay, now we got a map of the full island. See, this is a different map than we've been looking at in the previous videos. It's funny because it's like a similar art style. It's all still hand drawn. There aren't like satellite maps of these islands yet. Not that no, it's like what? 61? No, there weren't satellite maps of these yet. So it's funny to see in the time before we even, like we knew what these islands looked like, but we didn't have a way of taking pictures of them, so we still had to draw them by hand. You know, like even the best maps were still drawn by hand at this point. Maybe not, but this one certainly was.
Volcanic in origin, these islands have never been connected with the mainland.
See, that's so funny too, because that is just something that I always go out of my way to say about islands, is specifically that they were volcanic and that they never had any interaction with the mainland. That is important to specify because that completely recharacterizes the wildlife that exists there.
Nevertheless, despite their isolation, they teem with life.
You know, so what a funny cut to these birds, because it looks like they noticed that they were cut too.
On the Galapagos, Darwin observed many familiar animals.
So this is all Robert Bauman that we're watching now, right?
Penguins, similar to those of the South Polar region.
I can't believe Darwin didn't write more about these penguins, because that would have been like the first thing to surprise me. You know what? I don't know. I don't even know if he knew about regular penguins yet. Like, when did we discover Antarctica? Wasn't that like 1801 or something? Like, wasn't that like way before Darwin? So I don't know. He might have discovered these penguins before like Antarctic penguins. That's funny. Oh, and the great auk would have been alive still at this time too. So it might have been like, oh, that's so funny. That's so funny to think that he would have saw these and thought of the great auk rather than penguins, because he probably didn't even know about penguins. I guess the Beagle sailed around the south of America, so they went through like the Tierra del Fuego, Magellan's Pass or whatever, the Strait of Magellan. So they might have seen penguins then too. They might have like seen penguins first in South America and then found them on this island as well. Yeah, because there's like Humboldt penguins and stuff. So I don't know how surprised Darwin was when he saw penguins here, I guess. I guess it's not that surprising when you come to the Galapagos from the west coast of South America, because there's already penguins there to begin with.
Regions. Swarms
Oh, the crabs.
of crabs of many different kinds.
Dude, one day I'm going to learn what's so special about these crabs.
Large but harmless land lizards.
It's so funny because I've been watching so much Galapagos stuff that it kind of just melds together, but I still am so impressed by these iguanas.
Called iguanas.
And I think this is a marine iguana. It looks like it's sweating the salt out of it. I know that's what the marine iguanas do.
And small, seed-eating birds called finches.
Yeah, so when I go to the Galapagos, I'm actually not going to try to find any of the finches. I'm only going to be there for like 5 days, and there's like almost no chance that I'll see all of them or even most of them. And, this image right here just kind of illustrates that like the finches don't look amazing. There's not bright colors or anything. Like they're pretty standard looking birds. It's just when you compare their beaks specifically, you realize something about them. They're not the most visually interesting animals on the Galapagos, I'll say. Like they are from like a scientific perspective, very useful, very valuable, but from a purely aesthetic visual perspective, like Darwin's finches are not that interesting.
Darwin reasoned that all these animals must have come from the mainland of South America.
Even that like step in logic, right? That suggests so much knowledge of like the workings of the world, to say that like because I'm trying to imagine how much he knew, like I'm trying to think he must have known about like geology and maybe like volcanism. I don't know if he believed in plate tectonics or if he even knew about plate tectonics yet. You can't appreciate how hard of a conclusion that would have been to come to if you don't also realize how limited the rest of his knowledge was. I mean, he was very knowledgeable, but relative to how much we know now about this subject, he was going on pretty much nothing, which only makes his insights all the more amazing.
But here on the Galapagos, he saw other animals found nowhere else in the world. Gigantic tortoises that weighed over 500...
That was a great shot of the tortoise. I bet Bauman was so happy when he got that shot. Like, he was adamant about including that shot somewhere in this edit because he got that shot.
Iguanas that swam in the ocean.
Damn, but I do have to critique you a little on these shots, as I don't think they're perfectly in focus. That would have been so infuriating back in the day to waste your film on a shot and it's not even in focus.
And long-beaked finches that ate insects instead of seeds. How did these new kinds of animals originate? Since they are found nowhere else, they must have come into being here on the Galapagos.
I see the thing that like is probably the most important lesson or the most important aspect of the world that Darwin knew at this time, or Darwin was learning about, because I learned about this a little, is the age of the earth. That was really like what caused a lot of people to start actually reevaluating the systems of nature pretty much. Is once you distance yourself from like the Bible or the 6,000-year-old earth model and you accept that the earth has existed indefinitely for millions of years, like that, I guess that's a religious divide, right? You either believe the story of the Bible, 6,000 years old earth, or you look at the evidence that is present on the earth and you say, oh no, like this would have taken millions of years. And at this time, it's clear that Darwin knew that the earth was millions of years old. You would not have come to these conclusions if you just believed that God put all these things here. That's the difference, I guess, is the story before this is that God would have made these islands and he would have made these birds specifically for these islands, but Darwin said, no, these islands must have been here for millions of years and these birds must have come from somewhere else. It's so logical and it's beautiful. It's beautiful and it's amazing to think of Darwin coming up with all this on his own.
Darwin studied the finches on these islands.
It's also hilarious that these finches are the thing that caught his eye on this island. Like there's huge cactus trees, there's freaking marine iguanas, there's blue-footed boobies, there's flightless cormorants, there's penguins. And he was busy this whole time just looking at these like unspectacular little birds. It goes to show what he was paying attention to and why.
To explain their great variety, he reasoned this way. Because of their geographic isolation, the Galapagos Islands originally had no birds. Then, many thousands of years ago...
See, like, even that suggestion would have been, like, heretical or, like, blasphemy, to suggest that, like, God didn't create these islands with, like, everything, with humans in mind. Even that suggestion was, like, a big step to be taking at this time.
A few finches with strong, short, seed-cracking beaks must have flown there from the mainland.
Dude, I love this like attempt at illustrating the past. To crossfade a bunch of birds flying in the air over like live footage. It's just so funny. It's like I can imagine the person assembling this edit would have just been thinking like, how can I show that birds were flying over here, but it was the past, so you wouldn't, and it's just like that is how they ended up illustrating it, is by fading over one plate of just still unmoving birds just plastered on screen with like a 50% opacity, so you can almost not even see them sometimes. It's a funny technique, I guess.
In the absence of enemies, seed-eating finches multiplied and soon crowded the islands. The increase in finches may have made seeds more difficult to obtain.
Yeah, see, if you look at these birds, though, they are just, like, regular-looking birds. I mean, they are just finches. It's amazing that, like, he even knew that these were all, I don't know, related still.
But as new finches were born, slight differences or variations occurred among them.
See, I also love the old-timey explanation of, like, mutations and, like, natural selection. I guess he didn't say anything wrong. It's just, like, that's not really how you would explain it now. But they are doing a good job of walking you through the evolutionary mechanism that led to all these beaks. That is, like, the most important part, is understanding, like, a little beak helps pick up this little seeds, big beaks help, break open the big seeds or whatever. To actually understand each reason behind the evolutionary route that was taken is very important. So they're doing a good job.
Perhaps one was born with a longer, sharper beak. This turned out to be a useful variation.
See, but they don't explain why. That's the only problem, is like, I guess Darwin probably didn't understand why either, so that's probably fair, but, to not explain where variation within a population comes from is kind of like just saying it happens magically, like until you understand how DNA replicates, how it, can create mutations, and how those mutations can create, different phenotypes in an individual. I guess that's too much for like a school children program, but that's the full explanation, I guess, that we're not getting, but they're still doing a good job of, the general beats of the story.
Enabled to pick up insects of all kinds. Insects were plentiful on the islands. So this new finch lived to pass on its longer, sharper beak to some of its offspring, and they in turn to theirs.
See, I love this too, because this like little bird family tree probably took a day or two at least. Like, to make this bird tree, probably you had to hire some sort of artist to print all these out or something. Like, I don't even know how you assemble this physically, but yeah, you must have hired an artist. It probably took them at least 1 or 2 days just to make this, and then to get this one shot, just so that they could have this one shot in this program for like 5 seconds. It's like so much more work had to go into this than if I wanted to make this visual today. Like, I could make this visual in like 10 minutes using Photoshop and Premiere and everything, but this, you don't think about that, but like, you needed to create this physically so that you could film it with a camera. So it's different. It's different filming techniques, even though it's the same illustration, or it's the same like visual that I would have produced, but it had to be done completely differently, And again, just for like a 5-second shot that like nothing's even happening for.
Because they're variations.
I am curious about all these illustrations though. Clearly somebody did like actually hire an artist for this, because these are really like good illustrative drawings. I don't know, it's just somebody made some money from this.
Long beaks was useful for obtaining food. These long-beaked finches survived and reproduced alongside the original seed eaters. After thousands of years, long-beaked finches came to form a new separate species of insect-eating finch. The process by which useful variations result in new species, Darwin called natural selection.
Yeah, I also love the voice actor, like, emphasizing natural selection. That's what everyone criticizes me for when I do voice acting, is the words that I emphasize or overemphasize, and it's just funny to hear another person do that as well.
On these same islands, we can see variation and natural selection at work by observing another group of animals, the iguanas.
I can just hear the note, pause for dramatic effect. Like we just, like he just finished his sentence after taking a second long pause. And it's not like we were in suspense or anything. We were looking at an iguana, waiting for you to say an iguana.
These land iguanas, like those on the mainland, are sturdy animals with long, round tails.
This is wild though. That's just its little grotto that they sleep in. That's funny.
But here, and only here on the Galapagos, Darwin found another kind of iguana, an ocean-living or marine iguana.
Yeah, we've already been over the marine iguana in several other videos, so I'm going to try to not comment on it a lot, but let's see.
With webbed feet and a flat...
These things are just so cool. Like, I could just spend a whole, 10 minutes talking about them, but because we've already looked at them, let's just watch through it.
tail. The marine iguanas are similar to land iguanas, but their webbed feet and their flattened tails...
Yeah, this is what I'm saying, though. Like, I would have noticed the marine iguanas way faster than I would have noticed the different beaks of the finches. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just so funny that the example that Darwin picked up on that became, like, the famous example of evolution or natural selection was just, like, the dullest animals on these islands. I don't know Darwin well enough to know if he did write about these marine iguanas at all. He must have, right? He must have seen them and encountered them and thought about them. But it's funny that, like, they are not nearly as famous as the finches, even though they are far more, like, unique and spectacular.
enable them to swim well and so suit them to water life. They live along the rocky shore. At low tide, they crawl among the rocks, foraging for exposed seaweed. How did these new marine...
I know this sounds wrong. I know I shouldn't even be talking about these, but I kind of do want to, like, bring these to another random desert island somewhere and just see if they can start, like, a second colony. I know that's wrong. I know that's, like, the last thing you're supposed to do when environmental conservation and stuff, but, like, I'm just so curious. Like, these are the only islands where they live. Could they exist anywhere else? Like, I'm so curious.
iguanas come into being? Did they evolve from the land iguanas? Darwin reasoned...
Yeah, like what he just said, like the evolution of marine iguanas seems so obvious to me. Like there are land iguanas and then there's no food, but there's food in the water and there's also a marine iguana. Like it's all there. All the information you need is right there. It's like 1 + 1 = 2. Like the Darwin's finches, there was like 14 or 15 finches. Like you had to compare all of their beaks, whereas this is just like a one and done clear example. I don't know. It's funny. Again, it's so funny that this is not the well-known example of evolution on the Galapagos, that the birds are more famous than these marine iguanas.
in this way, the original...
Just to me, they are far more spectacular. They're not better at illustrating evolution. They illustrate evolution in a much clearer, more singular sense, I guess.
Galapagos iguanas were land iguanas. Lacking natural enemies, they had multiplied rapidly. Increased population may have made food scarce. But not all the iguanas were
Dude, these are some good shots of iguanas, though. Like, again, shout out to Robert Bauman.
exactly alike. As new ones were born, variations occurred among them. Perhaps some were born with flattened tails or slightly webbed feet.
Again, they're not going into, like, how these mutations happened, which is fair. It's very, very complex how mutations happen and actually affect things. It's funny to think that, like, if you don't know any more about, biology and mutations and stuff, then, like, it kind of just seems like super random, like how evolution happens, And I guess from even Darwin's perspective, it must have been confusing to try to imagine why there was variation to begin with. Like, I guess that's what that's what I'm wrestling with. It's like, how does someone understand evolution without fully properly understanding mutations as well? But I guess, one has to come first at least.
This was a useful variation because flat tails and webbed feet enabled these iguanas to swim in the ocean, and their new surroundings offered them a new source of food. They survived and multiplied to pass on their useful variation to their descendants.
Yeah, these shots are tough. It's tough to see the marine iguanas, the black marine iguanas on the black rocks, you know. All right, Robert Bauman, he was a bird studier. He was not a professional photographer. I mean, maybe he was as well, but these shots are a little tough. These shots are cool though. Like it's tough because they look like the rock. Like their skin texture is the same texture as this like volcanic boulders.
Through variation and natural selection, a new species of iguana, a marine iguana, originated.
Like, I don't even know if I would have been paying attention to the birds if I got to this island and I saw these guys. Like, I would not have cared at all about those birds. The second I saw one of these marine iguanas, that would be all I would have paid attention to. It's a good thing I wasn't on this ship with Darwin.
For almost 30 years, Darwin gathered evidence to support.
Yeah, see, this is the image most people know, or this is the image most people associate with Darwin, so it's easy to forget that when he was actually in the Galapagos, he was like a young man. Like it's funny to also think that like he needed to think on that experience for so long. Like we saw the picture of him when he first visited versus this. Like that's how long he needed to like ruminate on his experiences and his observations to get it all ordered enough to put it down on paper. It very clearly was something that he put so much thought into, and it took a lot out of him to come up with all these ideas. It's just funny.
Support his theory. Then in 1859, he published a book called The Origin of Species, presenting his ideas on the way
It's actually on the origin of species. It's not just the origin of species, but you know, that's an easy mistake,
in which different kinds of living things come into being. He said there is a struggle for existence because many more individuals are born than can possibly survive.
Dang, geez, I didn't know there were this many iguanas. See, this is a great shot. Good for Robert Bauman for getting this. That's the tough part. That's the most impressive part of this whole thing is that I don't know if Robert Bauman was like directing this. I think it said he wasn't, right? It was like that guy Herbert or whatever. But to go to a place and get all the shots that you need, like I wonder if he had a shot list. Like I wonder if he knew he needed a shot of like more iguanas than you could ever deal with because he knew that they were going to say that there were so many that they had to evolve, you know? Or did he just get this shot and then they were able to use it later? Like, did he know that he needed this shot and so that's why he got it? Or did he just get this shot and then they used it, you know? Like, because this is a really great shot. Like I don't know how you get a shot with this many iguanas in it if you're not trying to get this shot, you know? If he didn't know what the edit of this program was going to be and he just got all these shots on his own volition, then he really is like a fantastic photographer, you know? Like he got enough information for them to make a whole program on just using his own like instinct of what is important to film. I don't know if he did that or no. I don't know if he knew every shot he needed to get or if he was just getting every shot he could and ended up getting a lot of good shots. That's the question, I guess.
He said there is variation because no two individuals, even of the same kind, are exactly alike. He said there will be natural selection as individuals pass on their useful variations to their offspring.
It's so funny listening to this because, like, to me, this sounds like the most obvious statements you could ever make, you know? It was obvious. He was just outlining, like, the actual real world, you know, rules and everything. It's wild that nobody else really put it down in words like this ever before. I mean, I guess there was Wallace, but...
Generation succeeds generation, and new kinds of animals gradually make their appearance.
It's so sensical, but it's also so complex. Because, yeah, once you learn it, it all makes perfect sense how it all works. Like, yeah, obviously, like, things die and things survive, and the strong, you know, pass on their genes. But, again, it's amazing to understand how these ideas first came to someone.
Thus, new species originate. In this way, said Darwin, the vast variety of living things have all originated. Through variation and
I don't even know if I would have gone on that step. Like that is the craziest step that I think would have been hard to convince everyone of. It's not only that like all of these birds came from one bird and like the birds evolved, but to say like, well, if you track all of that change back, then like they all must have come from like the same place, you know? Like to suggest that like humans and chimps are related to like frogs and like birds and lizards and stuff, like that would have been harder to swallow than like, yeah, the birds came from other birds. But also that's like such an intelligent follow through of the idea and principles that he was coming up with, that he thought about it and then he thought back and he wondered like, how would all this have actually happened, you know, over millions of years? It's just, you know, he clearly put so much thought into it.
Natural selection, one kind evolves from another. All are different, yet all are related.
Yeah, I know that there is like the famous sketch of Darwin's that he like drew the first like actual tree of life. I don't know if they're going to show it in this. I don't know. I don't think they would, but there is like a famous sketch that Darwin drew that is pretty much this, without the dinosaur, I guess.
A century.
I don't even know. I don't even know if Darwin knew about dinosaurs. I don't know the timeline of the knowledge of dinosaurs, but I can only imagine he didn't because people didn't even believe dinosaurs were real. That's a random question, though. Did Darwin know about
Almost
dinosaurs?
a century and a half hath passed since Darwin's voyage to the Galapagos. By studying many kinds of living things, we have learned much about the origin of species. But few animals have had more effect on scientific thinking than Darwin's finches.
Oh, I mean, I guess they just said the title. There you go. Oh, it's the end, too? Dang. All right, that's strange. I wasn't expecting it to end there. I honestly was expecting more finches. I feel like we looked at finches for like 3 minutes out of how long is this? This is like 10 minutes long. Yeah, I feel like we were looking at the finches for not the whole time, or not even like half of the time. I feel like half the time we were looking at the marine iguanas. The other half we were looking at like Darwin himself. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe I'm just making that up. I feel like we needed more of Darwin's finches. What I wanted was a graphic of every single bird's beak in comparison to one another. I think that is like the best way to exemplify their actual differences, to see the bird's beaks and to see the seeds or the insects that they're using their beaks on to eat, you know? I remember seeing that graphic in my bio textbook, or, you know, in 8th grade or whatever, and that sticking with me, like seeing the actual visual difference in shape and size of their beaks. And we just didn't get that. We got, you know, a lot of good footage and we got some, you know, some images and we got an explanation, but we didn't get a full-blown comparison of all of Darwin's finches, which I think is like how Darwin did it. You know, I think Darwin took drawings of every single finch and he compared them. So that's kind of a shame. I really kind of wish that like something called Darwin's Finches would have given us like all 14 finches all at once to see how their beaks were. But, you know, they hired an artist for some reason, but they didn't get them to draw all the finches. That's something that I feel like is missing from this. Maybe we'll see it in another documentary. I actually have another program that's also on Darwin's finches. So maybe we'll compare and we'll see if that one is any better. Not that this one was bad. This one was still good, but again, I don't feel like we focused on the finches enough, and I don't think we got to see enough of, you know, the finches to actually illustrate what makes them evolutionarily interesting. So hopefully we'll see more of them in the future, but for now that was a good start. At least we know how the evolution took place to begin with. So no, I think with that we're going to just cut to black, I guess.